Hi, everybody. I'm Scott,
And I'm Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
and this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we're really grateful that you're watching this video of us.
It's Luke. You keep dropping this ball so hard. I don't even know how to take it. I don't like, where is it? Where'd the ball go?
It's
Is it
intentional.
Luke continues to insist that there's only three of you out there watching, but
If you
I
want to
have
prove me wrong, drop a comment.
Luke.
drop a
We're
cup?
not like other people. We don't need the self gratification of knowing that they are leaving comments for us.
It is very true.
Although, if you do, we'll probably mention your name on the next podcast we record.
That
Assuming
only
that we notice that we get comments because we're glued to our YouTube channel.
the YouTube channel that we said, you know what, this weekly thing? Nah, let's make it every other week.
Every other week.
Or occasionally. We'll
Or
see. We'll see what
every
happens.
other month.
The theory behind that is we actually come up with better topics to talk about.
Like how we just spent the last little bit considering what we should talk about tonight.
Yeah, right before I push we're on air. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
We are at least a little bit honest and transparent.
That's
Which
why
is-
you, the three viewers, love us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I think they love us for other reasons, but they'd still appreciate the fact that we're honest.
You're right. It's my incredibly chiseled features, but we can move on.
Right.
Yes.
So tonight we are talking about. I'm trying to boil this down to something simpler
And
than
this is
how
why
Luke defined it. I'll let Luke tell us how he said it, but first, I'm going to boil it down, simplify it to be the reasons why someone might make a movie versus the reasons why someone might watch a movie.
that is technically a different topic, but I see how you got there.
Yeah, because we had talked about doing like movies as escapism versus film as message vehicles, right? But yeah, that's a good way of putting it though, Scott. Of like, as a content creator, do you have like I'm just doing this for the fun of it, and to give people a good ride, or like do I have an agenda? And as a person going in, you might be like, do I want to go watch a movie with an agenda right now? Or do I want to watch some pure, just fun, blow them up whatevers, or, slapstick whatevers, or like.
Shootouts. I've been craving some shootouts. Not been seeing many shootouts lately.
The shootouts.
Mostly just superheroes punching each
And
other.
not related to sports of any kind, but weapons.
No, none of that sports. I'm not looking for that. I mean, if it happens in a sports movie I like, great. I'm talking about shootouts.
Shootouts? Yeah,
Bam!
like in which one is that? Dark Knight Rises, when like they're playing a football game and then like kablawi.
No, Luke.
No?
No. Batman, once again, not very many shootouts.
I know.
People shooting at Batman.
Yeah.
Batman not getting hurt.
And I know that Bane just like blew it up. Like he didn't like shoot.
And he
a lot.
blew up. Yeah.
Yeah.
See, now we're getting completely derailed. I'm happy to have been the person to derail this entire conversation already, only like 5 minutes in. But like, here's the deal. There's a spectrum, no matter which way you slice this topic, right? Whether or not you talk about it as escapism, or if you talk about it as art, right? And that kind of range, or if you talk about it as like, why would a creator want to make a movie versus why would someone want to watch a movie? That is also potentially a spectrum of the kinds of films. Thus, we have the Luke graph over there.
But it's the other way for me.
No,
It's a quadrant. There's a quadrant here, potential. No,
quadrant.
No,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Yes.
All right. So the point is, what do we think about that? How, like, for instance, I have heard the theory that Hollywood has gotten so far up its own bumhole that it no longer knows how to make escapist content that's fun, but rather only knows how to deconstruct escapist content to make it meaningful for the current cultural climate and political climate, rather than truly just here's escapist fun. That is a theory that's been thrown out there. But even with your Marvel and your big franchises, Star Wars, whatever, they've been infected by the need to be somehow messaging or political or something else of that nature, and thus are deconstructing everything rather than building up just fun,
Right.
maybe even nonsensical, silly stories.
So I think Marvel is a great example because to a certain extent, I have to believe that someone walking into making a Marvel movie has to, on one hand, believe that what they are making is truly just escapism. Because how else do you get to that world, right? How else do you do anything in that world? And ultimately, it's a little bit weird because whether it's actually intended to be in the movie itself or just what the media decides to say about a movie, ultimately it becomes a movie with a message. I mean, Black Panther was a good example. Captain Marvel was a good example. That is the one with Brie Larson, right?
Captain Marvel, yes.
Yeah. But especially Captain Marvel for me, which if I had gone into that movie without hearing any of the media beforehand, I would have been great. This is a fun escapism, enjoyed the movie, but there was so much talk about feminism and woman empowerment and everything else. And yeah, maybe there were some elements of that in there, but I like I said, I don't think I ever would have thought about it if someone hadn't planted that idea in my head before the movie.
So that's kind of another quadrant here. Like,
Oh man,
what
we've
is
got a 3D graph going here, guys.
no, like, but that's kind of like what what is the film doing, and then what is culture doing with the film, right? And like, how does that play into just pure escapism versus like message, right? Like, because that's a good point. Like, maybe someone did just make a movie for this purpose, and then people are like, whoa, there's a reason for it. And some of it, there's even like there's a meaning in the film simply because of the time that it was in, and so it had a way of saying things that now, looking at it from a different vantage point, you're like, oh, okay, that was definitely a product of its time, and so therefore had a message baked into its very DNA because it was then and not now.
You guys remember the 80s action movies that I think many of us would consider to be generally pure escapism, and how at least some of them were not? Like Rambo First Blood Part 2, Rambo goes and kills many commies. Like, do you remember that? Because again, you have these heroes that were, even though they were escapist action stuff, although Rambo First Blood, like the first Rambo movie, is not supposed to be escapism. It is not an action like, oh, it's just 80s. No, this is supposed to be a serious movie about a guy who's having PTSD and being treated poorly after going through the Vietnam War. That's actually what Rambo was about. And then you get into Rambo 2, where Rambo is super crazy action hero, and he went to like Russia and or Russia's surrogate and killed all the commies to rescue some Americans, basically. Which I don't even think I've seen that movie, but I know that about that movie. Okay. And so even you're like, one of the first things I come to when I think about like just escapist stuff is just an 80s action movie. And there are some of those. Is Predator a secret art film about something, symbolically? I don't think so. And if you want to make it about that, that's you doing your own twisty turnies in your own mind to make the plot mean something like that. I'm pretty sure Predator's about, wouldn't it be cool if Arnold Schwarzenegger and his band of military, like big guys, went into the jungle and found an alien, and the alien was hunting people like it hunts, like we hunt deer. And then Arnold Schwarzenegger had to fight the alien. I'm pretty sure that's where that came from, ultimately. And it's a fun, silly movie, and it is escapist. And it's, there's emotions. You care about the characters a little bit, but really, it's not that emotional. It's not a super drama. This is about big, burly men getting killed by an alien and then eventually fighting back, right? So even in the 80s, though, as what I'm trying to say is, like, even in the 80s, in the action movies, which I would typically go to for escapist entertainment in my mind. I think there's a lot of that. But even there, I think there are these moments where the cultural, like you're talking about, the cultural climate, the political climate, the current world is still affecting the movie's creation, the movie's themes, the movie's ideas. You know, how often are Russians bad guys in the 80s?
Exactly. Well, yeah, you know, whether it's Rambo stuff or if it's the boxing movies, just totally blanked it.
Rocky,
yeah, you know, like or something like that, you know. Yeah, but then you have Miracle, right? Like, which made later, but like a same time period of like, yeah, this is the thing, right?
Well, right, and that's what was, and then of course, Miracle, based on the true story of when it was a big political issue at the Olympics,
right? Because it was, right. So that's fascinating. With that, you know, there's another thing that I've felt as I've watched films over the years, which is, you know, like Nazis are just always the bad guys because it's very easy to be like, those guys are genuinely bad. But when there are like global tension issues, like we don't talk about Mao, we don't talk about Stalin, we don't have too many movies. I mean, like, yeah, we have Russians, but like we don't have like, wow, what is going on over there?
Like the origins of communism are generally really ugly and violent,
right?
Like that kind of movie,
right?
Or
where, you know, like, I mean, like, yeah, Russia, but but no, it's this idea that is a problem. So today it's like the safe bad guys are Nazis, like, which it is. It's a safe bad guy, but like, what else is out there? You know, like, and that's where like Iron Sky, where it's like the Nazis have been on the moon this whole time. You know, you're just like, that's hilarious. You know?
Well, if we want to go with Nazis as bad guys and pure escapism, we're talking about Indiana Jones.
Sure,
right?
Absolutely. He rides on a white horse. Yeah.
Classic action movie, classic escapism, adventure. What matters in Indiana Jones? It's set in the past just enough that it's like doesn't really matter in the sense of today's anything. It's based on old serials, so it's supposed to be sort of fantastical. And the Nazis are the bad guys. And guess what? At least in the 80s, everyone thinks the Nazis are bad guys. You know, at least, you know, oh yeah, Nazis, shoot them. Right. That's where they're at, right? And that's Indiana Jones. But on the other hand, in the 80s, like a movie that still, I think, I guess you could do a spin on it now, but Die Hard. Who are the bad guys? The bad guys are guys who pretend to be politically affiliated, who pretend to be like, we're the terrorist organization that want these people released, and they're really just some German thieves. That's it. They just want some money. That's it, right? And it's not even about corporate greed. Like there's a little bit of that thrown in there as a argument from the Alan Rickman character, I think, a little bit. And there's a little bit of the one of the staff in the building being a cocaine guy who just wants to close the deal, and like he's kind of a punk, and he kind of gets his due. But it's nothing about that film reads as this is about corporatism being bad or about greed being bad or about, it's like there's thieves. They're clearly too greedy because they're thieves. And here's a cop who just wants his wife back. And this is what this is going to be. Right. And it's emotional on the one hand, because it actually does get you into his head a little bit and you feel for him because he keeps on getting beat up. But really, this is one dude having shootouts, mind you, in a LA building at night. You know, like that's what this movie is. A lot of hide and seek and thievery, and there's nothing, you know, is it really a lot there that's supposed to be meaningful in some way? It's truly escapist, and Die Hard to this day is still considered to be one of the best action films.
Best Christmas movie ever.
It is, you know, it is a Christmas movie, even though it's totally not, but it totally is.
So then what about more recent, you know, things like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of heist, you know, more recent heist blocking, stopping, you know, like Inside Man or what are other ones?
How is Inside Man not on some level, at least commentary about like race?
Movies?
About what?
About like race relations on some. You realize how many different races show up in that movie and like little jazz between the different races. And I tell you why I think of this way is because it's a Spike Lee movie and it's in New York, and he like brings up, you know, different little things here and there about the differences of how people think about each other. Unlike many other Spike Lee movies, that is not the point of the movie, but it's absolutely, there's commentary or ideas there playing, I think, the entire time.
Sure, but then
that's that's typical Spike Lee. It really is. I mean, that's feels like who he is and how he makes a movie. Like he is going to make a point above and beyond just the escapist fun that's there, right?
But like having a topic that you are interested in, and so therefore it shows up in your film, right? Like race relations or language issues and barriers between cultures and that kind of, like that's one thing because it's something that it's part of your lens, but it's not the point of his film, is it? Or if it is,
Well,
I mean, but even there, Inside Man, like ultimately, it's like Nazis. Like,
well, there's that too, right? And again, well, so you say it's not the point of the movie, but the problem I think that we're feeling today might be, okay, first thing, is there such a thing as pure escapism in the movies? Does it exist?
okay, well, let's start with this thesis then, and you guys can we can go from there. What if it matters based off of what the audience member is doing? As the audience member, if you're going in and you're like, I'm just here to have a good time, shut off my brain, and just enjoy the wild ride, and I'm not going to think about the stuff, then it doesn't really matter how much the person put into their film to try and make it mean something. And it doesn't matter how much the media is trying to like cram it down your throat that this means whatever, whether they're in line or not. If the person's just sitting there saying, meh, whatever. But that doesn't, again, there's like intention versus like what's ultimately received. So,
I mean, you're kind of getting to death of the author kind of stuff a little bit, right?
But like, okay, so there is the movie, was it Vice about Dick Cheney?
Yeah.
And like 90% of that movie, even though it is about a political topic that is real events, could very easily be taken as escapism. And then the last 20 minutes of the film, they put in this huge political diatribe that's just like, and we're going to shove this down your throats and you're going to like it. And I'm like,
well,
great. Can I
with
turn off this movie and leave the theater 20 minutes before the end of the actual movie so that I can actually just leave with my escapist enjoyment?
You can leave, but you didn't know.
Exactly.
But I don't know why anyone would ever expect a movie about Dick Cheney to be anything close to escapism. Seriously, it's a political figure. It's a biography. It doesn't matter how you do it unless you're going to be incredibly farcical, right?
Until that last 20 minutes, I could have enjoyed the experience as an escapist, just possible tale, alternate reality, whatever it actually is of what happened, and enjoyed it, right? We've talked about how Miracle is a great movie and there's a lot of political stuff in it, but ultimately it's an escapist movie and you can just enjoy it for what it is because that's what it is.
Well, that's the history thing, potentially, where you're looking at history and going, that's back then. I don't have to worry about the political stuff at the moment because it's not about, I'm not currently afraid of the Cold War or nuclear destruction. So it doesn't read that way to me anymore because I'm a modern day American where Russia is generally just a corrupt nation to the side that we don't really care about in the same way we used to. But it's absolutely full of like, it's got its politics, even though the movie is focused on hockey and it's trying to be a character movie. It's not trying to be a political movie, but it absolutely has to play a part because that's the history of it. And I don't know, to try to go back to Luke's thing about, is escapism purely a thing in someone's mind? When you walk into a theater and if you don't care enough, basically, is everything escapism? Does nothing ever matter to you?
Can you experience as escapism, even if everybody else is not?
I brought up Vice from the standpoint of there are times when it is possible, but there are other times in the way the movie is made when it is not possible.
That's fair. I think there's other times where, so my mind, I don't think can do this anymore. I've heard a lot of people, especially people who just watch movies as, just it's something fun to do occasionally, I've heard a lot of people say the same statement of, I don't watch movies to think about them. I watch them to, to just have fun, which would be, right in line with this idea. If I go to movies to escape,
Yep.
and my issue is that with the way I think about film and what comes to my mind, I can be escapist with it, but a lot of the times, even the escapist works, I can't help but recognize themes and or moments and or false notes or even correct notes where I'm like, you're very much trying to say something and I don't agree with you, or that strikes me as wrong, or either way, whatever, if we agree or don't agree, it's still a message that I can sense very clearly from what you're doing here, as opposed to just a fun, I was out there. And to be honest, right, like, it's not that we want all films to somehow not have meaning, or like even the escapist big fun ones. Like, is Avengers Endgame pretty much escapist entertainment? I'm going to go ahead and say it on the majority side. It's majority escapist entertainment, right? But it has some characters, it has some themes, but the themes are not about necessarily current day issues. They are not about politics per se. They are not necessarily trying to push any one angle. The theme is stuff like, sacrifice yourself for the greater good. What does it take to make the bet? Those kinds of things happen. One of the most classic arcs of all time for any hero is being willing to sacrifice yourself or something that you have for the greater good of mankind. And that is not particularly political. It is certainly a message. It is certainly a belief, an ideology, but it is not a political or current cultural message that might take you out of the escapism. Fantasy can have a lot of that going on as well. Even if you have, that's where if you have fantasy entities representing different countries, like that Shadow and Bone show just showed up, and it's like 3 or 4 different country eras at the same time. It's clearly Russia, but it's clearly got like a Berlin Wall thing going on. And it's clearly got it's got all these other things going on, and then it just sort of does whatever it wants. And so it's easy to be escapist because it's kind of dumb. But I guess, is it about it being political specifically, like modern day political? Is it about certain ideologies showing up that suddenly make it so that it's not escapist? And again, people can watch movies that I can't watch without thinking about messages and stuff that they can watch, and yes, they can say, yeah, it was escapist fun. My issue with that is that I fear that those people are letting ideas into their minds maybe more than I would care for, because I think everything has a message. And my question is it are sort of deeper classic things the only thing you can really deal with in an escapist movie for it to truly be escapist? Bigger themes like sacrifice is good to save the day. Like, is that the only kind of thing you can, walk into? Father son issues, personal kind of stuff, as opposed to larger cultural context or race or any other sort of political or politically charged right now kind of thing.
Right.
Like,
so I guess the question is, what does it mean? Because yes, you're right. Stuff has messages. So then, what does it mean for it to suddenly not be escapist, right? And something I'm thinking about, there's a couple things I'm thinking about. One of them is like Star Trek, right? Where like one of the cool things about sci-fi is that you can explore ideas that you might not be able to do. So like, you have the first like alien human kiss, which is like ultimately a thing about like, interracial marriage, right? Which is a hot topic that you can't like deal with in media, except that you can if you put it in this other context. But then that leads to other issues of like, okay, but then when does allegory break down, which is a whole nother topic of stuff. But then beyond that, there's also things of like, okay, what if it's an idea that you may find problematic, but the movie's still just escapism? Then is it more that you have to be on guard against ideas that will just seep into your mind, which actually is like one of the major points of media, is that you can like just kind of, you're letting your guard down so you can let ideas flow into you and maybe explore ideas that you haven't been open to in the past. So things like, and this is just interesting to me, that like both Zootopia and Lego Movie 2 both have this like, you can be whatever you want to be. It's like, but
even a line in the New Justice League has that.
Right. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, no, you can't. What are you talking about? What do you mean? I'm whatever I want to be. I don't understand. Like, it's very so like things like that. But it's interesting because they're presented in a way that just like it just flows, and either you're like, well, that's just ridiculous, or you're like, well, that might be important for me somehow, and it just kind of it's a building block. And then if you're hyper vigilant, then you're like, well, that wasn't escapist because I had to like listen and like pay attention, you know, like I don't know, like how do we play that?
Has anyone seen like a popular movie that was made in China for Chinese audiences primarily? If he's like Detective D and, you know, Monster X, or the thing about,
and that looked
I mean,
so
the
ridiculous, I
closest
didn't go.
I mean, the closest thing I've seen is some Hong Kong films, but that's not really China.
Yeah, I've seen some
well,
Hong Kong stuff, and I've seen a fair amount of Bollywood.
you don't even have to watch the whole movie to get the idea. You watch a trailer or two and you start realizing that in China, sometimes escapist entertainment is like complete nonsense, in the sense of all the it truly is fantasy, old world, monsters and power and kings and queens and mythology, but like not necessarily. I mean, granted, I'm a Westerner. I do not know if it means something when the dragon is gold and does this. I don't know if that suddenly means something to the average Chinese person, but very much so. Those movies are like 2 hours of explosion, monster, kung fu. What is happening? And you look at the dialogue, and it's like the plot is being driven. Characters may want things like to fall in love, or to stop the monster, or be the most powerful, but it's basic. And it is like, how can that not be, in a sense, escapist?
Okay, let's think about another one like Bahubali.
Bahubali,
Right, which is just, it's so nuts over the top, but at the same time, like there's quite a lot about like
well,
how do you
yes,
interact with the gods and what's the
yes,
role of whatever, and you know, like
yeah. Bahubali has a strong Hindu bent,
right,
right? It is absolutely firmly a Hinduist mentality movie,
right,
and these characters are falling in line with that ideology. And if you reject it, you get destroyed. Ultimately, like that is absolutely where Bahubali stands, and it's something you notice. Since I am not in India or any place that has, you know, Hindus and Muslims fighting each other constantly, that does not strike me as a issue. And so I say, I don't believe that as ideologically Christian. I don't see it that way. I recognize it, find it somewhat interesting, but mostly this movie is just bonkers and I enjoy it. Right.
right.
And this is where I want to get back to this idea of, like you said, I'm almost wondering if escapism has everything to do with what the current climate is, right? Like, is it all just about, in the current climate, these things are the big issues. And so if you ever touch on these big things, now it's a hot topic. Now you made it political. Now you made it something that everyone has to make a decision about, which they already had to make a decision about when they vote, when they talk to people on the street, which no one does. But, you know, that's the thing they have to do. Whereas in movies where you aren't addressing a modern ideological hot topic or political topic or cultural issue, if you're not dealing with it, then it's suddenly escapist. A disease movie, a movie about pandemics, could have easily have been escapist at any time before COVID. It was escapist nonsense. It could be the virus pandemic. It can just be a what's that movie? Outbreak. Yeah. Outbreak is fun. It's a fun movie because you're like, oh, that would be crazy. It's a thriller. Not now.
That's
now
you get nuked. That'd be nuts.
Right. If that movie came, and that's also the other thing is, if that movie came out now, you can still watch it and have a ton of fun, I think. But if that movie comes out now, everyone goes, you trying to say something about pandemics?
Right.
You trying to say something about the current cultural climate, political climate? You trying to say something about a party?
So here's a potential hot take or a theory or something, but like when we look at older films, are older classic films more capable of being escapist fun because we are not bogged down by the message that the filmmakers were wrestling with when they made that film at that time? So for instance, like, you know, a lot of these movies in the 50s or whatever dealing with like divorce or stuff like that, like that was like crazy then, I assume, I'm pretty sure, but like, you know, today it's like, okay, it's just fun, right? It's just hilarious that they're doing this thing and doing this stuff, right? I think of Doctor Strangelove, right? Where like that movie was apparently a lot more funny back then, and was also like really like a big deal because it was like hammering on the things that were currently like the zeitgeist of the era. And today, and I'm just like, I don't get it. It just doesn't make sense, and it's not funny. So maybe movies lose their ability to be interesting as well. Like, what do you guys think?
Um, I agree with you to a certain extent that being a movie being m- connecting with modern topics, whatever those topics are, is a possible way to get to escapism and still have the possible message as well. I think that there's certainly a change in how filmmakers have approached putting messages into their films to the point where we're just going to sit, pretend you're dumb, and tell you what to believe, whether it's the right thing to believe or not.
Sure, which I think is probably one of our big complaints against things like the Christian film industry.
Sure.
Tell a story.
It's the film industry in general, to
Sure.
be perfectly honest, these days, because you can't make a movie. I mean, even Captain Marvel, which was really a fun movie. I mean, I don't know who started the, well, this is a feminist movie or whatever, but
Marvel did. I'm pretty sure.
right, but you know, like, do people even just make escapist movies anymore? Like, is that even a thing, or do you have to have some kind of message in there? And for me, that's a lot of. We go back to a couple episodes back talking about the Oscars and why we don't like them. Like, that's a big reason why I don't like the Oscars. It's a big reason why I don't like a lot of the movies that are coming out right now, is because you're not letting me have my escapist fun that I want to have.
Okay, hold on. I got an idea. We keep talking about, I mean, and I've read stuff about this, like this idea of escapism, the idea of something fantastical that's basically in some level meaningless. And so you get to go have your fun and you don't have to worry about today's issue, your poverty, your frustration with your friend, your relationship issue, whatever it might be. You get to walk away, go into a theater and escape to something else. But here's the thing. I think that maybe we're taking escapism and I'm playing with this idea, obviously brought it up, but like we're taking this idea of escapism and saying, current cultural climate and political issues. Politics have shown up, that word political issues or politics shown up a bunch in this conversation. But, we are also in a country right now that's very divided about ideology and politics and other things going on. And I don't know for sure, but I imagine that a movie that had a strong political message, if the country was more united about that political message, if you walk into a movie and the movie reinforces a belief that you already hold or you care about, right? And wrestles with a belief you don't believe, right? And wrestles with that and comes out with but actually this belief, which you actually hold true and dear, you may be escaping your life. But even then, even though that's somewhat real and current, that actually reinforces I think it in some ways reinforces your escapism. It reinforces your beliefs. It's a good feeling, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a couple things. True escapism, I think, has to be something that's so universal in its themes or its ideas that generally speaking, the mass audience will all agree about X, Y, or Z. Like, hey, sacrifice yourself for the greater good's a real thing. You should do it. Right. I think that generally speaking, people recognize that's a hero thing and they will get on board with that and have no issues with it. If suddenly that became a hot topic issue for some reason, suddenly I don't think it can be escapist. But there's something also about reinforcing your beliefs, reinforcing your ideas that helped you get into it.
So escapism with a message movie works just fine as long as you experience no cognitive dissonance during the entire film. Whereas, yeah, okay. Another aspect of this, and we can go wherever, but this is kind of another thing that I just want to throw out there is, as someone who wants to make movies,
sure,
I want to have messages in my films.
No.
And the challenge
Either.
is how do you convey your message in a way that is the story instead of just saying the message, which is my problem when I try and write, because I'm actually terrible at it. And so like I try and convey an idea, this concept, this way of looking at the world, and then it just comes off stupid because ultimately I'm like, I don't actually have a story here. I just have characters saying things.
It's not that you can't do it the way that you do it, Luke. The issue, I think, has always been that you start with the message and then you try to make a story.
Right.
And they typically say the wisest thing to do is to tell a story, and your message that you care about will probably come out because you care about it.
Right.
Right. And so your characters will end up having certain flaws and certain arcs and certain ideas that will naturally come out because that's what you're interested in.
Right.
That is what you care about. That is your message to say. And so you tell a story you think is interesting, and stuff comes out of that. And I am a big believer in doing it that way. That's how I tend to come up with stories. I'm like, that's a really cool thing. And as I flesh out ideas or characters or whatever, I start realizing what I care about, my thoughts on philosophy, ideology, science fiction, like anything I come up with is from me. You know, it's naturally going to be that way. And so that theme comes out, but it's not necessarily a movie or a story to address a specific issue. If you're going to look at somebody who tells stories to address specific issues ideologically, message wise, you go look at Jesus, and he does it through parables, right? Very specific stories to tell a very specific message about X, Y, or Z thing. And that was in a teaching rabbi teacher context to a group of people. Pastorship might be a something similar to today.
Well, and I think of the fables as well, you know, Aesop and all the, you know, where it's like, here's this very specific message that you're going to get from this particular story. Yeah.
Right. And so okay, just to go on this road for a little bit, where does potentially parables or a good message or whatever become Christian filmmaking that most Christians I know despise? What's the difference there? And something that comes up, whether it's a Christian movie or not, a message movie at all, is often the idea of preaching to the audience. Again, this idea of the messages being the whole thing. And there's
which Scott, you've mentioned, that's what frustrated you so much, is that the movie got to the last 20 minutes and they said, and now I'm going to turn on the sermon.
Yeah.
And just a question, Scott, and I think I'm okay. Just a question. If the last 20 minutes of Vice happened to be, for some reason, your exact political beliefs, your exact ideological beliefs, not contrary at all, if it happened to be down the center of what you believe personally, would you still have found it annoying?
Probably.
Why?
Less likely because it didn't frustrate me. It didn't feel like I was being lied to.
Sure, right.
But to a certain extent, yes, it still would have annoyed me from the standpoint of, you know, I didn't come to this movie to get preached to.
You didn't come to the movie to have a sermon.
Yeah.
You didn't come to the movie to be your teacher.
Right. Well, it was very much here's this story, and then all of a sudden, right near the end, we're going to like cut off the story and just preach at you for a period of time.
So people literally went to Jesus to be healed and to be taught. He was a rabbi, a teacher. People literally went to him to be taught. When people go to church, there might be various reasons they go, but everyone expects a sermon. Everyone expects to have some level of teaching or a keynote speech, a TED Talk. They might even think of it as, but like they're going there to get something, to hear something. They know that's part of the game. And I think that Hollywood, for however long, and it might be for as long as Hollywood's been around, as movies been made, because art and telling something through art's part of it. But I don't know that most people want to go see a movie to be taught.
Right.
And if they do, they might be interested in a documentary,
right,
where it's very obvious that there's going to be some sort of viewpoint being explained and some facts maybe being given or whatever. But people don't go to the movie medium to be taught. At the same time, anybody who is a filmmaker knows that you can teach through story. You can teach through the medium.
Right.
And many people in Hollywood want to teach and want to say something. And in our cases, I would say that generally for us, what they want to teach is antithetical to what we believe to be reality, to be good, to be true, or at the very least, very different than what we personally believe.
Sure.
And so you've got people teaching you things or trying to teach you things constantly, whether it's the big budget action movie with a theme or a idea or a media background to it, or 20 minutes at the end of a kind of fun sort of revisionist history or what we think really happened in this person's life that's, 20 years ago, or an art movie, a truly artsy, some would say pretentious movie of whatever kind, that's going to go into the human spirit and human nature and this event. And we're just going to look at daily life of this kind of person in this world and why it's so hard for them, or why it's so important that they do this, or why you really need to vote for this person ultimately. like that stuff exists because people are trying to teach. And when you come at it with a desperate need to teach someone or control someone, or worse than that, not engage with dialogue or engage even with wrestling with your own beliefs, which those movies also have a different vibe. When you can tell that a filmmaker is truly going back and forth in their head and wrestling with an idea of, here's what some people are saying, here's what other people are saying, and I'm not entirely sure where I land on this issue yet. And so I'm using this character in this movie to walk through these things. Even that has a certain tendency of, even if it doesn't end up where you agree with it, you can respect the journey of, you went through the process of trying to figure it out. I may end up differently, but you went through the process of figuring it out.
So at that point in time, I guess maybe the easy way to say when it switches from being escapism into a message film is when the film stops and the message starts, instead of the message being woven as part of what the story is, right? Like,
well, and that's where, okay, for Last Jedi, what's the message of Last Jedi? Let the past die. We have to reinvent it and be the new thing. And at the same time, there's an issue that's a disconnect because of everything that came before it. The Last Jedi as a film in its own could have been fine at doing what it wanted to do and going down the path and the theme it wanted to. The issue was it had a legacy to deal with. And so it tried to use the legacy and subvert it to reinforce this idea of destroy the past and make things good in the now, and the bad version of that and the good version of that. And ultimately got a little bit hamstrung by a lot of people basically being like, no, but we just want the past again. Or when you do something new, be careful what you destroy, because we all have different opinions about what's actually good and valuable about this and not. And I think some people would say that these message movies, you say, it's not woven in. Well, I think sometimes they can weave it in too, but maybe it feels contrived, or maybe it's so blatantly not what you believe at the outset that when small thing here that's woven into the story, or small thing here, it's also woven into the story, or character does X, you're like, why'd you make that decision? Already there's a disconnect in your head because you are not following, you're not empathizing, you're not there. You don't understand why they would do that.
Right.
And even when you can empathize, then it's an even more like discerning game of, I see the emotional appeal you're making about this subject, but is that even reality? That might be one person's reality. Is that everyone's reality? Is that what this subject that you're bringing up is? Because again, stories, the more specific you get on one specific thing, the more deeply universal you get. And so to get specifically into one case about hot topic, right, and making that be the universal because of that, and someone in the theater saying, okay, now you've brought all this up, I'm thinking about it, and honestly, that's not universal. That's that specific situation for that specific reason. You have all these disconnects that show up even when it's woven into the story. It depends on how your mind is working. My mind is on guard, generally speaking, in any movie I watch, not because I'm trying to be on guard, but because, especially nowadays, I'm generally just, hey, what are you trying to say? What is your deal? Are you trying to have fun with me and we have a good time together? Or are you trying to get something in my head? And I'm not particularly keen on the latter necessarily. I'm going to inspect it before I let it in.
Well,
Right.
you made, as you were talking, it made me think of Charlize Theron in Monster, which it's
Mm.
like a super specific story, but then like what's the global idea that comes out of it, right? And unlike you, who's super like, before I let this idea and what like I'm much more of a, so tell me what you think. I want to know why you're thinking that. Like, explain that to me so I understand what you're coming from, so I can be like, how does that fit in my, how does that fit into my understanding of reality? So yeah, like, yeah, that's very interesting. The specific versus the global versus the, is it part of the story? Do you actually understand even why you have that? I mean, it's one of those frustrations in film for a lot of different minority groups, is like, you don't understand me, so when you put me on the screen like that, I'm like, that what? You know?
Right. And that's a whole other topic. I
Right,
just
yeah.
wanted to, before we, I assume, wrap up soon.
Yeah, yeah.
Mad Max Fury Road is another interesting example to me of thematics and worldview and ideology, because what many people and critics said the theme of that movie was, or what the themes or the ideology coming out of that was highly feminist, and not necessarily any, like, that the biggest thing about it was a feminist work. And I watched the movie and I came out of it saying, well, even though you even said that, having watched the movie, I don't believe that it is a specifically and only feminist work, because of the way that story is structured, because of the way that world is created. I absolutely believe that women were abused in this story. Like, the idea is they were abused. That's clear. And they should not be abused. That's clear. And guess what? Feminist or not, I think most people would agree that abuse is pretty bad, especially abuse of women in the way that they are abused. And the way it plays out, and the way I always have found when I've tried to discuss this, is I don't find it feminist as much as I find it, hey, stop trying to use people and all people.
It becomes more of a human rights in general issue than a quote unquote feminist issue.
Right. And that's, again, generally conservative, Christian evangelical, right? I don't jump to, feminist ideology as a good thing. I generally stand, I'm usually wary of, like, what do you mean when you say that? But even hearing that and going to the movie, my interpretation of what that movie's themes were actually different, even though other people are watching the movie and saying that's a feminist work because the women take charge. Furiosa is practically the main character, and Mad Max really doesn't matter. And, there's this conflicting viewpoint on the same movie, and thus, in a way, everybody likes it and everyone thinks it's a message film in some ways. Or, sorry, some people say this is a stupid movie about cars moving back and forth. There's people who feel that way. There are many people who think if it's got a message, it's good, because I see it as a human rights thing, others see it as a feminist thing, and so on and so forth.
So is it more that in order to be a more escapist film that doesn't get bogged down by the message, do you instead need to explore themes and concepts instead of specific messages?
I mean, that's a very interesting point, Luke, and I think that's possibly one of the other differences is we had more exploration of theme, where in the past, where now we've got more, no, this is the message, this is what I need you to believe, so I'm going to do what I have to do to make you believe it.
Right, which is why you watch a Christian film and that's like, if you just pray just right, you'll get your truck because God wants to bless you. You're like, what? Instead of like the theme of like, what is divine grace in the midst of suffering, or what, like there'd be a bigger theme potentially instead of like this message.
Or what is God's blessings?
Right.
What does that look like, and how it can be varied? Like maybe getting a truck and not getting the truck.
Right.
And both people having blessings, even if they want, the same thing. Like, there's a lot there, and it's simplified. So it's very, and the Christian stuff, like that example in particular, right? It's always this sort of, you took something, you really, really simplified it in a way that I think makes it now inaccurate.
Right.
Right.
Well, and you think, I think also of like Bruce Almighty, which I enjoy so much. And
Sure.
Watching the behind the scenes, the director's like, I was trying to figure out prayer. So this is a movie about me trying to figure out what's prayer all about. What's this? It's very interesting.
Yeah. Alrighty, well, let's wrap it up here, and we can, before we go, even though we've taken enough time already, um, I want to just leave it open to recommendations again. I know I've got one that kind of just randomly and weirdly popped into my head based on a question I think it was Jonathan asked. So just anything somewhat tangentially related to anything that we've said tonight in any way, shape, or form.
Hey
Do
Scott.
you have a recommendation for people?
Hey Scott, can you go first this time?
Yeah, you have one.
I have one. I do. So this came up when Jonathan asked about foreign movies, and we watched a movie in one of my film classes in college from Hong Kong, which is why I mentioned that I had seen one from Hong Kong. It is called Peking Opera Blues. What I remember about this movie is more about how hysterical the subtitles were than anything else. However, it was an enjoyable and probably to me at that time escapist movie, even though it may not actually be that. But I do remember enjoying it, and my only advice is if you do try and go watch this movie, please do not get the dubbed version. Find the subtitles and spend the time to read them because it is totally worth it.
Wow. Okay.
Luke, good luck finding the IMDb credit for it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's there, but you know.
Awesome. Sorry for links not working. Okay. Let's see. Well, Bruce Almighty. I mean, that one's easy because I'm thinking about it now. So I enjoy that film, and it's a message movie in a sense. You know, it actually in a lot of ways it's absolutely a message movie. So you know what? Since I can't come up with something better right now, let's Bruce Almighty. It's fun. Go for it.
The first movie that came to my mind was, I feel like I've probably already recommended it, which is Gattaca. Just because it's great. It is a message movie.
Maybe I've recommended it.
Maybe, I don't know. Someone probably recommended it at this point because Gattaca is great and it's not too far from being recommended at all times. And it is a message movie, but I don't think that it would be anything that people would generally be antithetical to. I think people would generally be down with that message. Although, and sorry, little random trail. I was just wondering, are Quentin Tarantino movies escapist movies? Because what are the themes and the messages of Tarantino films? I know there's going to be, in a sense, a moral of some kind, or you know, this person did this and that equaled this, so that means that he's suggesting Y ideology. But when I think about Tarantino, those movies are so, no matter where they're set or what they're doing, highly stylized, incredibly stylized dialogue, characters who do things very interestingly, even though they're consistent. And I never think that I'm in my own world, right? When I'm in a Quentin Tarantino movie, no matter what movie it is, I never think, oh, this is downtown, or oh, this is over here. No, I think
Sure. Yeah. He's
Tarantino's
constantly
world.
pushing stuff into his world. Yeah.
So just a thought of escapism. Maybe Tarantino feels more escapist because he's so stylized. It's like, that's not my world.
Well, thanks for joining us and for this little extra Quentin Tarantino talk.
Maybe
I
we'll
hope
do an episode on other worlds.
I hope you enjoy it. And Luke, write that one down. We're doing an episode on other worlds.
Maybe.
Or Tarantino.
Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you again next time.
We're just gonna keep talking.
Later.
Yeah, it sounded like we're out. Yeah.